Reid, welcome to the All In podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into this. I mean, we've worked together, which I'm sure we'll talk about further on in the podcast. But could you give a brief rundown of what you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the co-founder of a company called Athletes to Athletes. We are a one-on-one advising service for high school student athletes that want to pursue college athletics in the States.
Awesome. And let's go dive back into your history. How did you get there? Because I know you have a degree in exercise science, so a little bit different than, starting a business advising college athletes or prospective college athletes, although there is a tie-in of the athletic world. So what was your childhood like? Like what led to basically doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will try to make this as relatively condensed as possible, and then we can dive into pieces that are more interesting than others. So I grew up very much in a sports family. My dad played college baseball growing up. My sister was involved in dance. My mother was probably the smart one of the group. She didn't do sports, but she was always very supportive, very, very much a mom on that end. So I grew up playing all kinds of different sports. Found out around 12 years old or so. I was 6 foot. I was left-handed, and being in Texas, couldn't hit anybody, was scared to play football. So baseball was my option. So specialized relatively early in my sports career, started playing baseball, figured out I had a bit of a knack for it, and got recruited all through high school, ended up at Texas Tech University for my freshman year on scholarship. And to put it lightly, I guess, spiraled a little bit when I was in college. Ended up going to 4 different universities in 3.5 years. Graduated from the University of Texas ultimately with a degree in exercise science, and then actually ended up going back for my master's degree at the University of Texas in sport management. So that was sort of my upbringing through school, and worked as a coach for a couple of years, which I think probably any athlete at some point in time has probably done some degree of that. Worked in the front office of a minor league hockey team in Texas, which is about as dysfunctional as you can probably guess that it is.
Oh yeah.
And then worked for a larger corporate company for media rights and streaming for sports. So worked there for about 4 years. So I kind of did the whole gambit of the sport world. I did the coaching aspect of it, did front office with a team, did corporate, and really just didn't have a passion for any of those things, to be quite honest with you. My passion was working with student athletes sort of through my own previous experiences. And so I took a leap of faith with a co-founder, and we've been doing this ever since, and it's been a blast.
Super cool, because I think a lot of athletes, when they kind of step away from their time in sport or their athletic career, they want to stick around sports because it's kind of like what you've done your whole life, right? And so it's cool that you got a taste of everything and you're like, maybe this isn't for me. And then you pursued creating your own opportunity and kind of carving out your own niche in the sports world.
For sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that was most surprising to me whenever I kind of started looking out into job world and stopped focusing on just playing my sport was how diverse the sports world is. I forget that it's a multi-billion-dollar economy in and of itself. And the number of things, the number of branches that you can sort of shoot off into to work in is amazing. I couldn't believe how many options I had coming from a sport background.
That's very true. I think people do forget about that. They think like sports, they just think front office. And there are all these different facets, whether it's athlete management, it's creating sports content, it's sports podcasting, it's front office, like you said, or consulting other athletes or coaching. It's just like anything else. Like if you're interested in desk, let's say, just because that's right in front of me, there's so many aspects, right? You could be operations, you could be an accountant in a desk company. Like there's so many different things that go around it. But I think just because of sports is something that we see one side of, we forget that there's so many other sides.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it can be plugged into anything, it feels like.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to go back to kind of you touched over, what happened when you went to college. And I'd love to go over that, where you kind of went through, you said 4 different schools, and you kind of spiraled. Let's dive right into that.
Yeah. So starting, I think the recruiting aspect is, I think, kind of where it needs to start. I was, for lack of a better term, a fairly high, I was not quite a blue chip guy, but I was a highly recruited person. I was 6'4", left-handed pitcher, could throw multiple pitches for strikes. Wasn't the fastest thrower in the world or pitcher in the world, but I had enough check boxes that I was intriguing to a good number of folks down here in the States, from from a baseball perspective. And so my recruiting actually started my sophomore year. I started getting, the questionnaires and the emails and the camp invites. And it is amazing how inundated you can get with those things, regardless of sort of where you are in the recruiting hierarchy. It's amazing the type of data that these schools have and what they're able to sort of push out to you in any one of these sports. And so I kind of jumped into that world my sophomore year, and it was a bit of a whirlwind for me all through my graduation. I kind of got to see the highs and the lows of going to different colleges and meeting different coaches and seeing what it was like for them to recruit me with an expectation, what it was like for me to be recruited, whether I did or did not hit those expectations by the time it came time to sign papers and actually give offers and things like that. So I actually signed on with a junior college initially. It was closer to my home, smaller area. My pitching coach was actually the coach at that junior college. And for me, it seemed like a good fit. I was young for my age. So I was graduating at 17 instead of 18. I felt like it was going to be a smaller environment. I was going to be able to develop a little bit more. And so that's what I was going to do. And the fall of my senior year, I had been recruited by Dartmouth University, which is up in the Northeast in the States, and thought I was going to go there, was going to use athletics to sort of get me to a higher academic school. And August rolls around my senior year, and the coach calls me up and says, "Hey, by the way, we've had your grades since May when you were done with school. Now, all of a sudden, we don't think you can get in. We're going to go do something else." Whether that was athletic, whether that was academic, one can only speculate. But at the end of the day, it was August of my senior year, and I had no options. So tried to get on with this junior college, was able to walk on, super excited about it. November rolls around, and I get an offer from Texas Tech University. Went to a showcase, had a pretty good weekend. They offered me a scholarship. After speaking with my parents, after speaking with some other folks that I sort of trusted in my circle, I decided to sign with Texas Tech. But when I tell you I signed with tears in my eyes, that would be true. And I think a lot of it came from anxiety, because in my gut, I knew that I was doing it because other people told me I should, or I was doing it because it sort of filled the expectations of what was expected of me and not necessarily what felt right in the moment. And that would come back to backfire on me a little bit whenever I did, in fact, get to Tech. And I will say it has nothing to do with the school as a whole. I think Texas Tech is a wonderful university. I think that the people there that I met were fantastic. I still have, lifelong friends from that experience. But for me, I wasn't prepared to go to West Texas, 4 hours away from where I lived. I wasn't prepared to take the classes that I took. I didn't even know what major I had until I showed up. They just handed me classes and were like, "You're an exercise science major." So I hadn't even thought of that. And so 3 weeks into this process, I'm calling my mom in my dorm going, why did I do this? What happened? This is terrible. And I just don't really know how to handle it. So fast forward to winter semester of my freshman year. And I get home, and my sister, who has sort of always been my best friend ever since I was growing up, pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, something's wrong with you. Like, you're not the same person. You're a shell of who you were. I was gone. I had lost a ton of weight, and I didn't really have weight to give at that time in my life." And so I ended up going to therapy on her recommendation and spoke with him. And turns out that sort of through my first experience in college, I had gotten an acute case of depression that was sort of brought on by an extreme sense of social anxiety that I was getting when I was at school. And because of sort of the environment that I was put in from an athletic standpoint, I had actually gotten a fun little case of body dysmorphia as well that had led to an eating disorder. So I had lost 60 pounds since I left home in August. So from August to December, I had lost 60 pounds whilst trying to eat as much as I possibly could and work out more than I ever had before, because I was with a Division I program. And so that to me was a bit of a wake up call of like, hey, this isn't working. Like, this is not going the way that I wanted it to. And so I finish out my spring semester, just kind of, for lack of a better term, to be honest with you, fight through it. I mean, I traveled a little bit with the team. I didn't really make a lot of the conference rosters, but I wasn't in a good place mentally or physically. And so I can't really blame them for that. And as I was leaving Lubbock, I called my mom and was like, "I'm not going back there. I'm not doing that anymore." And so ended up going to a junior college, Weatherford College, right next to where I lived. It was a little bit closer to home. It was smaller. It was more manageable. My pitching coach was there. And I went there for a year as a walk-on and had a great fall semester. In junior college for baseball, you play a fall season and you play a spring season as opposed to just a spring. So my fall season, I crushed it. I don't think I gave up one earned run that whole time. Was great, was a weekend starter, just everything was going well. Talking to schools, went on quite a few official visits. And at the end of all of it, didn't really have a strong idea, didn't really have a strong emphasis on any school that I was talking to. And so I kind of took it into the spring season and started to work there, was still keeping in touch with coaches and things like that. And ended up sitting the bench my spring semester. My coach called me in between fall and spring and said, "Hey, do you care more about baseball or do you care more about just everything else?" And I didn't really know how to answer that question, to be 100% honest with you. So I was probably more transparent than I should have been and told him, I love baseball and I want to play, but I'm not a pro guy. That's not what I'm going to do in my life. So I have to focus on the academics. I have to focus on these other things. I have to set myself up to go to the next step of my 4-year degree. And I went from pitching every week, starting every week into the fall, to getting a total of, I believe it was 11 innings over the course of the spring season or something like that. And I think 6 or 7 of them came in like our last 2 games or something like that. So for me, to be honest, that was just sort of a hit on me of like, man, I'm burnt out. Like, this is not what I want to do. This doesn't make me happy. This was a sport. It was supposed to be fun. It's not fun. And so I called all the coaches that had offered me scholarships to go to the next level, and I turned all of them down. So I'm done playing. I'm hanging them up. I'm not doing this anymore. I got mixed reviews from different coaches. Some of them thought I was joking. Some of them respected the idea. Some of them threatened me and told me if I ended up on another team somewhere, that they would contact the coach and whatever else. And so a whole litany of responses on that. But ended up going to the University of Texas right over here by in-state, sort of our big in-state school. And it was the first time that I felt relief when I decided that I wasn't going to go play sports anywhere else, which was not at all the emotion that I expected to have, sort of effectively ending my career. So that was kind of, that was the very long-winded version of sort of what took me from starting in college sports all the way until I retired after my sophomore year in college.
Well, I very much appreciate you sharing that, because I have a very close person to me who went through a very similar university experience, and they told me the same thing, where it was like the university was, from the outside you think it was like the best years, but they just didn't want to be there. It was like a month before all their friends were leaving, so they're like, okay, I need to go too. So instead of taking a year off that they wanted, they just kind of went, and then it ended up being just they don't use the degree anymore. They just have resentment for ever going back to school, but they stuck it out, and it was just they fell into a depression because of, they just wanted to leave. They wasn't the right fit, and I think a lot of people go through that because especially the pressure on high schoolers, and especially in the States, like this is, I think, more so than in Canada, especially when it comes to student athletes. It's the pressure on, high school student athletes to decide where they're going to go. And even just the fans that you guys get at games as a high schooler is so much different. Like playing high school hockey, I have my parents and that's it. And maybe not even the other kids' parents, just my parents always showed up to everything. And yet again, like there was girls from my high school team who went on to go to play to Princeton and stuff, but they didn't have that same pressure when they were at the high school level, which I always find is interesting. If you could go back, like what advice would you give yourself to help deal with that and try to make those different maybe decisions from the get-go, or was it just something you had to experience and go through?
Yeah, absolutely. So funny enough, you should say that. The sort of the origin of my company is that exact question. My last semester, I had an extra semester I needed to take, I was a semester off from graduation. So I had to get my own apartment. I was living by myself for about 4 months before I got my degree, and literally had a pegboard in my bedroom. And as part of sort of my healing process, I guess, in this whole thing was, I would just pin up questions of like, man, what could have helped me prevent this whole experience? What questions could have asked myself? What questions could I have asked somebody else? Where could I have gotten a particular resource? How could this have been avoided in any capacity? And from all of those questions, and to be honest with you, there's, I literally wrote a book on like all the things that I screwed up on, essentially. That's sort of how our program built out. And part of that was also calling other student athletes and saying, hey, this happened to me and this sucked. I didn't like this. Did you have something like this? And they were like, yeah, more often than not, it was the norm rather than the exception, which was crazy to me. They're like, we talk about all the wonderful things and we talk about all the highlight videos and all the top 25 programs or whatever. And we don't talk about the extremely high rate of depression that you have in student athletes, the re-identification issues that student athletes have when they decide to play, whether they decide or a team decides or an injury decides or anything like that. And so from talking to all those other student athletes and sort of going through my own process, that's what we did. We tried to address all of those questions to try and help the next generation of student athletes not fall into those same pitfalls. Now looking at it where I am and what we've been able to create because of it, I would not change anything because I think I needed to go through that process in order to sort of see what this could be, to try and create ways to prevent it. But if I'm being selfish, I would have preferred not to have gone through all of that. I would have kept the 60 pounds and done some of those types of things. But that's just not how life decided it was going to go.
Yeah. Well, I feel that. And I think it's awesome that people who have gone through those kind of things are able to, you're able to get to a place now where you can go and help the next generation try to avoid those pitfalls. And I have the exact same perspective when I look back at some of the things I went through, like leaving snowboarding and not making the Olympics and that experience is the exact same thing. It's like, okay, how can I help other people? Because I realized that I was not the exemption. It was, I was actually the majority. There are a lot of athletes, even if they win the gold medals, who are dealing with the same depression and anxiety and the burnout of, pushing through some of these things. So how can you go back and help these athletes? So what were some of those questions that you ask athletes now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest one and the one that we've sort of built our entire company model on is, how is the school that you're evaluating, the school that you're talking to, holistically satisfying you? Does it satisfy you academically? Does it satisfy you athletically? Does it satisfy you financially, personally, location-wise? There's all these different aspects that go into the process. And unfortunately, especially down here in the States, because of the economy size of college athletics, we tend to, at the recruiting level, base 100% of our college decision on what is going to be 20% of our college experience in the athletic side. And so really pulling that part out of the equation, honestly, for a period of time, because if you're going to be a college athlete or you have that desire, your work ethic and trying to get to the next level is not going to change. Whatever I tell you is not going to change. So let's put that in a box. Let's put it over here. And now let's handle all these other pieces so that when you re-inject that box into the equation, it fits and you can see whether it fits or not. And so that's the biggest thing that I think we start with. And that's sort of what we grow from is how does this school, or how can we determine if this school is hitting these other touch points for you? And more importantly, as a, 15, 16-year-old, we don't want them to have their career figured out, but like, what are your passion points? What are your things that excite you? What are the that you can see yourself doing? What are the things that you can see yourself not falling asleep in class for? Who are people in your life that you look up to from a business perspective or a lifestyle perspective or whatever it might be? And just sort of helping them have a space to have those conversations and explore those things so that they can put that as part of their college experience and part of their college decision. Because 9 times out of 10, and I was the same way, and a lot of kids that I work with, you don't get asked those questions as a student athlete. No. You get asked questions, who's the highest ranking deal right now? What are your stats? What schools have you visited? Who's talking to you? It's all these things that aren't going to help you in 40 years. They're going to help you in 4.
Yeah. 4, if that, and you could be going to a different school in, half a semester. Yeah, it is so crazy. And I think it's just part of the culture in sports, right? Like, I think to go pro, you have to have the belief that you can do it. But at the same time, probably 99% of student athletes think that they're going to go pro when the stat is very different from that of who does go pro. Do you ever have to speak with athletes about that? And just, especially athletes who say, I'm going to sacrifice all these other pieces because I'm going to make it. How do you maybe help them figure out, okay, you can still try to make it pro or still try to pursue, this college, the sports side or the athletic side, but these pieces will actually still help you. How do you have that negotiation? Because I've seen you can still go pro without making, those same sacrifices, or at least, still having some of those, the social part, the financial part, the personal part, those things still kind of fulfilled. Like there's a balance there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think for us, the biggest thing is being as sort of blunt and transparent as we possibly can through the process. One of the things where we differentiate ourselves from some other companies that do similar things that we do is that all of our advisors are former college athletes and relatively young for the most part. So we can speak from a place of, I've been there, I've done that, I've experienced those things. So what I'm telling you holds merit and holds credibility. It's amazing how it's a bummer that we need to have that. But even myself, when I was going through the process, I had fantastic resources from a college counseling experience, from a coach experience, things like that. But for me, it was really easy in the back of my head to go, oh, well, you didn't go through what I went through. You coached or you did this, you don't know what it's like to do what I'm doing. So to have somebody sit across from you in a meeting and say, no, I know exactly what you're trying to do because I did it. And now I'm here to tell you that these things matter, regardless of how important this aspect is of what you're doing, does tend to resonate a lot with the kids that we work with. And I think too, the growth of current, especially professional athletes, sort of diversifying their worlds, whether it be from a venture capitalist perspective or investing equity and endorsements that they're doing, business deals, media companies, whatever it might be. Players across the board are starting to identify themselves beyond just what their sport is. So when you talk about Steph Curry, you can talk about his venture capitalist firm. When you talk about Brandon Marshall, you can talk about his I Am Athlete podcast. You can talk about these things that identify these folks in other ways and have shown growth in other aspects, so that when you talk to these kids, you can say, okay, let's say for all intents and purposes, everything goes perfectly. You're that 0.01%. You go and you do these things. The folks that you look up to and the folks who are creating career pipelines for themselves, what are they doing? They're diversifying who they are. They're beyond just their sport. They're beyond just the athletic piece of the puzzle. And to do that, why would you wait until you've got to that point to try and figure out what that is, when you can try to work on that now and build towards it in college, when you're literally at an establishment whose whole job is to help you develop personally and gain skills in areas that you're passionate about. So if you're going to be there and they're going to charge you money and they're going to make you work and they're going to make you go on these places, they're going to make you represent the school, get something back from that school, make them work for you. And so that tends to resonate with those kids.
That I think giving that relation to a pro athlete, I think I had to make it a relation on like a TikTok video that we did for 93 Agency just about athlete marketing. And a lot of athletes say, I don't need to post myself on social media. I'm going to be the best. Like, it doesn't matter. And so I like to make the relation. Okay, so let's take LeBron James, the best in basketball, arguably of kind of this era right now. And let's think about what he does outside of basketball, right? Similarly, he has a venture capital. He has the Spring Hill Entertainment. He has Uninterrupted. He's doing, I think it's Pencils for Promise. Like, he's doing all these different things, and whether it's, generating more income, generational wealth, whether it's actually just helping the community with his charities, like there's all these different points. And so I try to tell athletes, like, look at that as kind of a blueprint and see all these ways he's diversifying. And so you can't really make the argument like, I'm going to be the best, so I don't have to do any of these things, when the best are doing those things. Like, they recognize that those things are also important.
And I would argue that's part of what makes them the best. They understand their position. They understand the influence that they have. They understand the opportunity that's been provided to them, and they capitalize it both on and off the field or court or hill or whatever you want to, wherever they happen to be playing. I mean, it's to use LeBron as the same example. I'm fairly confident, very confident that he makes way more money off the court than he does on the court. I mean, his endorsement deals and his equity and his investments are far and beyond whatever he makes on actual basketball play.
Yes, 100%. I think I don't remember the stat exactly. I know I put it in the video that I made, but it's like 80 million or something that he made last year. And I'm pretty sure it was like 50, like 60 or something was from his endorsements, and well, beyond endorsements, but the companies he has and all these different things. And he was able to donate millions, probably 10 plus million for his charities and things like that, which is, more than the salaries of most athletes. So it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Sounds like monopoly money, if we're being honest.
I seriously, right? Like even the other day, I was actually seeing like a comparison of what a WNBA player makes in the whole season versus what, an NBA player who's getting fined per game is more. And I'm like, well, that is just a crazy stat to think about. Like literally it's just, here, let me pay this fine to miss this game when it's more than what most people are making in an entire year.
Unbelievable. To that point, though, funny enough, and this is something that we've started to notice with the kids that we're looking for. I say funny enough, it's more likely to say unfortunate enough. But the female athletes that we work with come in way more level-headed than the male athletes that we come with. And I think that's both a product of just general maturity. I think a lot of times girls just tend to grow up quicker. It is what it is. And I think part of it too is that unfortunately we haven't built, a professional structure for the vast majority of women's athletics for that to be something that is seen as a financially independent aspiration. And so they come into this process knowing like, hey, I've got to have this, and this figured out. And because of that, it tends to pay off for them ultimately long term, but it's an unfortunate reason as to why they've sort of had a beneficial head start in that very particular part of the process.
Very true. And I kind of see the same things. And even I've worked with some of the the athletes who have gone on to make it to these pro leagues in women's sports, which again, they're not really making that much. They still might manage another career. And similarly, they don't have the same, justification as some of the younger boys who are saying, I don't need to post on social media because I'm going to be the best. Like these are, girls who are already at the top of their game and they're really invested on being on social media because they understand they need to figure out new ways to generate. They're innovative. The leagues are even innovative of how they're marketing themselves. And they also care about making that impact on the next generation, which I think is, it's lost a little bit on some of the guys who just want to go pro or get this clout or whatever it is. I wish those worlds could mesh a little bit so that the girls are a little less humble and a little bit more fiery about the sports. And there's those opportunities. And at the same time, the guys learn from the girls that you got to diversify and put effort into all these different things.
100%. Yeah, no, there's a happy medium in there somewhere, I'm sure. And so with the introduction of NIL in the States, I mean, from what I remember, and probably reading a bit of a dated article here, but at least when it first started, I believe like 8 out of the 10 top producers on social, as far as like having a valuation of being able to market who they are, 8 out of the 10 were women, were female athletes. And I think to your point, they well-rounded themselves much more effectively than the guys did.
Yep, that's 100% true. I think there was a stat about the March Madness, and it was a similar where the women's basketball tournament. I know this year it wasn't actually called March Madness, but I think next year they're going to call both tournaments March Madness and use the same licensing. But the women, I think it was about 8 out of 10 of similar stat that they were generating the most publicity, the most gains and followers throughout the time. Funny enough, a lot of it was through documenting the inequalities of the tournament, that a lot of girls gain millions of followers on TikTok from, showing those behind the scenes. But I would say probably similar happened with the Olympics. I'd love to get some of those stats to come out and see, who came out of the Olympics gaining the most followership and audience of, male or female athletes. Because from my end, just being on TikTok, there were a lot of girls just crushing the behind the scenes content and gaining hundreds of thousands of followers in the process.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, I feel like when it comes to the Olympics and a lot of whether it be advertisements or sponsorships or endorsements, it really, from what I remember, it's majority female led on our end when we're talking about Olympians. I mean, that's who I think of on our side whenever I think about any type of brand deal or anything like that. So it's guys need to catch up on that a little bit, or at least try to figure it out, something.
Right. And I think it's also because the Olympics and college sports are kind of that pinnacle for women's sports. When we don't have the same, NBA or NFL or these same opportunities. So that's kind of like the opportunity to highlight women's sports. And a lot of times that's where most people see it. They might, there's the NWSL, but most people aren't really a lot of people aren't necessarily, following that, but then there might be someone who's like, but I'm watching Canada versus USA soccer, but they don't follow the league that goes on behind the scenes, versus most people who are watching the soccer at the Olympics are also, following FIFA, they're following, Premier League, all these different things throughout their soccer fan. We need to get them into these other leagues for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is a fascinating concept that you bring up. It's so, if it's entertaining at the Olympics, why would it not be entertaining at every other level? How do you justify that? I mean, I've never been in a more packed bar in my entire life than when the women's national team was playing in the World Cup and in the Olympics. I mean, I've never been in a busier bar than when those two things were happening. And then people just forget they exist for like another 2 years. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It's crazy. I mean, up here, same thing with the soccer was huge this summer, but it's also with the Canada-US hockey game. Any hockey game is like massively watched. But then again, it's like they'll be playing locally. Some of these athletes, there was a league up here. They had a Toronto team, a Montreal team, and some US teams, and that league ended up folding. I think a lot of the players went to the PWHPA, not the WSL. That's they completely revamped their marketing. So it's called actually it's
WHL.
Is it called the Professional Hockey Federation now or something? Or they changed their name. It was like the National Women's Hockey League last season, but they changed it. Anyways, but I
feel like that's the core of the problem though. Like, look at us. Like, how are we, why do we not know? Why is it not why is it not NHL? Right? Like, how is that not? Come on, us.
That's the big issue. Maybe that's why they changed their name. Maybe like their new name is going to catch on in a year or two. I don't know. But yeah, it's crazy how like they'll be playing locally and they won't get like any viewership. I'm like, these are the same people. Like we're seeing the same matchups. In fact, we're seeing, some Team Canada and US on the same team. And like, we're seeing some really cool stuff, but I just wish it got the same viewership. We actually had it was our Canadian soccer team who just, the women just came off winning gold this summer over the US. Anyways, we were always good when we beat the US, but they played in Ottawa near here. I was actually at physio and they were all doing their training in the gym, like right across from me. But sadly, due to COVID, I couldn't go meet them or do anything. But yeah, they played. I think they got 16,000 fans, like with our COVID restrictions. I'm pretty sure they sold out or they got close to like what the stadium was allowed to hold. So that's pretty impressive. And then we have a Canadian Can versus USA hockey coming up later this month. And I think similar, it's like pretty sold out. Like I really struggled to try to find tickets. So that's at least good, but hopefully that stuff kind of continues like year round, not just like in Olympic years.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whoever can figure out that secret sauce to get it to jump from 2-year stretch to 2-year stretch, whatever it might be, that's going to make a lot of money.
Yeah. So I want to flip the script back to talking about college sports. And what is something that you wish people, like if there's a young high school athlete listening or there's a parent listening, what is something that you wish that people knew about college or college sports before they got to that level? Something that, most people don't think of. And then all of a sudden they get there and they realize.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great question. I think for me, the biggest thing, and this is probably a low-hanging fruit, but it's so important, is that, when you make that shift from high school sports, select sports, whatever it may be, to college sports, depending on what division you go into, it's different. It becomes a business. It really does. And that the severity of that change differs based on program and based on division. But for me, like I loved baseball because it was fun. It was a sport. It brought me joy. I enjoyed playing it. You are now playing for somebody whose livelihood and whose family's livelihood is dependent on you and other 19 to 21-year-old kids winning a sport, which is a preposterous mentality. And they're getting paid millions of dollars on some occasions. I mean, anywhere from 6 to 7 figures to win sports games for children. Like that's pretty much what it comes down to. And we all understand the implications that has on the state's enrollments and the endowments, boosters. And so I get that there is an economy there and it's massive, but you have to understand that if you get there, they're going to recruit you hard if they like you and they want you, and they're going to tell you all the wonderful things and all the great things. But when you show up, if you're 1% less likely to win a game than the other person in your position, you won't play. They're going to play the person who's going to keep their own kids in high school at the same high school for 4 years. They're going to play the kid who they think is more likely to pay their bills for their house at the end of the month or at the end of the year. That's how this works. So you need to either love the game enough to be willing to be around it, play, not play, be involved. The joy and the love that the sport has to bring you has to outweigh what the potential of not playing, the potential of getting hurt, all these other aspects. For me, that was something that I never really comprehended. I never really made that jump. And so when I got to college and it became a business and things were treated as such, I didn't pivot effectively. And I think that is part of what affected my mentality, is that I had to sort of restructure how I looked at this sport that I played and I loved. I had to then look at it as a essentially job that I did while I was at my school. So that's something that I think isn't driven home enough for people. That would probably be the biggest one for me.
Yeah, that's great advice. And that being said, like, what are maybe some skills, maybe 3 skills that you think would be like the most important for high schoolers to work on, whether it's like communication or just basic skills before they get to that college level to prepare, even beyond sports, like also for the academics and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think communication is huge. I'm gonna steal that one from you. That one's massive. Whether it be coaches, whether it be admissions, whether it be teachers, whenever you get to college, whatever that is, if you cannot effectively communicate with the people around you, it's gonna be such a long, more arduous process. I think time management is huge. Your ability to, all the way from high school through your recruiting and classes, all the way into trying to manage being a student and an athlete all at the same time, is massive. And I think mental toughness is probably the last one. Not from this, and I don't say that to say, hey, ignore when you're not feeling good or ignore when things are quite the opposite. Like, be aware of when those things are happening. Be aware when you're surrounded by stressors. Be aware when you are in situations that you feel are unhealthy or unbeneficial for you, and then create ways to, whether that be through therapy or through coping mechanisms or whatever else, like find ways to work through those moments in this process. Because when it comes to the recruiting, when it comes to the playing, it's not for the meek of heart. It is a anxiety inducing process. And it does, and it kind of stays that way while you're playing a lot of the times. Now, you could be a blue chip person who gets all the interviews and gets all the NIL deals and it's easy for you, and that's wonderful, but that's not most people. And that's not what most people talk about whenever we have conversations with other college athletes and other former college athletes. It's not easy.
I love what you said about mental toughness, because we've actually done an episode about that, where we say like mental toughness is, people put it on, there's mental toughness and then there's taking care of your mental health, and they're like opposite sides of the spectrum. Or they say, mindfulness is over here and motivation is over here, or self-love is over here and self-improvement is over here. And I'm like, no, they're all together. Like, it's self-improvement from the place of self-love. It's like you said, mental toughness from the place of being open and vulnerable about your mental health, because it's tough to work through those things and actually go through. That's the tough choice. It's not tough to just like ignore it, wipe it under the rug and just keep pushing until all of a sudden you have a breakdown. It's tough to like face it and go through those things. So I'm glad that you came at it from that same perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like the more and more that I talk with the younger generation of athletes and the younger generation of kids, they seem to be a little more on board with that and seem to understand it a little bit better. I think we're much more open about talking about that. I think professional sports has done a better job of talking about that. I think you and I, when we were playing sports and our parents, it was very much, that was the mentality, right? I mean, like if I showed emotion on a baseball field, that was what got talked about after the game. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you XYZ? And so I got sort of drilled in my brain that, like, if you're a robot, that means you are beating whatever mental tribulations you may have at that moment. And that's just you can't hold that down forever. It's impossible.
Yeah, no, it's impossible. I think I've, in my athletic career, I try to seek that out too. Like, how can I basically become a robot where it's like input in, it's like food, training, all this, like sleep, whatever. output out best athlete possible. Like there, and then you forget, like, there's a reason why we're human beings and not computers and robots. We don't just run programming that just make us like the super athlete. Like we have to deal with, what's going on. And it's not like becoming the person who can become the most robot-like, who can just ignore all those emotions and feelings makes you the best. No, it's like embracing that. It's actually like leaning into it. And I think for a long time myself, but also a lot of athletes kind of go to the side of, okay, how can I become the most robotic that I can be? But actually it's almost the opposite, where we have to get even more in touch with, our feelings, emotions, all these things, to be able to work through those things rather than sweep them under the rug, because it bites us all back. And every athlete I've talked to, it's bitten them back at some point.
100%.
So if we could, let's kind of finish this off with a couple of things. One, where do you see like the college recruiting process going? Are there any new things coming up? And as well as with NIL, what's like some piece of advice that you would give, I guess, to high school athletes or parents who are trying to evaluate what college to go to, and keeping NIL and all those new exciting things, or where you think recruiting process is going in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that the NCAA sees the writing on the wall, and they kind of, their shell was broken with the NIL. They kind of got proven that they could sort of be tossed around a little bit when enough people realize that they're not treating the student athletes as well as maybe we'd like them to. So I think there's potential to have sort of a bit of a Wild West mentality in the NCAA. I think it was yesterday they released some notes to essentially asking to kind of blow up the association in its current form, minimize the rules, put a lot of power into the conferences. Now, if it happens, who knows? If it happens, how long does it take? All those different things. But in the short term, in the meantime, I think you hit perfectly. NIL is the biggest thing to happen in college sports in a decade. I mean, since probably the inclusion of media rights. And I think the biggest thing is going to be exactly like you said, helping families and parents understand that you can make the most of an NIL opportunity really wherever you go. And sometimes it's more advantageous to go to a smaller school or go to a school that's a better fit than to just try to go to Alabama or just try to go to Texas or just try to go to LSU or these big powerhouse marketing programs. I'm speaking from a football perspective just because that's easy for the NIL stuff, but insert, UConn for women's basketball, South Carolina for women's basketball, whatever it might be. It's going to be more important to build out and create a foundation for your own personal brand, and then find where that slots into a place that fits you in all those different holistic aspects that we discussed earlier. I think that's the key to it. Because at the end of the day, like no one, not even being rude, but like no one's knocking on the door of the third string cornerback for Alabama. Yeah, you're on Alabama, but if you really want to go for NIL opportunities, there's probably going to be team deals that you can capitalize on, but you're not going to have an opportunity to create who you are as an individual in that perspective. But if you wanted to go to a Division II and you wanted to create a regional partnership with a bow hunting company because you grew up in the outdoors and you love that, then that is a personal brand that you have created and you can prioritize and you can build a foundation on that not only is going to help you in the college process, but is probably going to help you beyond, whether it be continuing endorsements or job opportunities or career fields for people that you meet. And these are all things that, I know you touch on in the boot camp that you did for us and in our program. And I think getting past the flashiness of these big programs and these big deals that these 1 or 2 or 3 kids sign is the key. If you can look past that and you can see your opportunities beyond that and see the field there, then the world is your oyster.
I love that. And I think, like you alluded to it in that NIL bootcamp course, I think one of the examples that we made was, Nike sponsorship, and everyone wants this Nike sponsorship, or like you said, everyone wants to go to LSU or whatever these big schools are similar to the brand deals. Okay, that's great. But are you just athlete number 6,000? Is it just like, here's like our athlete plan. You're going to get this shipped to you every single month. Here's your contract. And we're kind of like forgot about you because we signed you, but like we have all these other athletes in the mix. And not to say that like Nike is like that or that's a bad deal. No, but I'm just saying you don't have to go, for that one biggest brand. There's other brands that can align with you, just like you said, with the schools that can align with the goals that you have outside of sports, as well as giving you the opportunity to build your personal brand. What if you want to start a podcast and there's a brand that will work with you to launch it and like be the supporter of the podcast and the presenter and get you an editor or do some of these things or work with you to leverage their platform so that you gain more of an audience off that. There's a lot of different things that you can do if you're just creative and you think, again, like what you guys do with the recruiting process, you think holistically more than just, the sport or the clout or whatever that is.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it harkens back to that point that we talked about earlier. I mean, the school is going to make you work for them. So make the school work for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Good. Well said. I have 2 questions I always end things off with. The first is, out of all the daily habits that you have, if you can only pick one, what is that one biggest game changer?
Probably my morning list. I don't know what I would do without that. I think that it just keeps I don't remember even where I heard it, to be 100% honest with you, but something that's really helped me with time management and with my anxiety is, somebody said, take a minute, take 2 minutes in the beginning of the day, write down all the things that are on your mind that you feel like you need to accomplish or need to get done, cross out the things you have no control over. And then when you have that last list, start trying to figure out how to get those things fixed that day. And that for me has been a world changer. It's kept me way more focused in what I want to do and what I want to accomplish each day. And I've seen substantive change when trying to implement that.
So important, because I think a lot of people who are, whether they're athletes or creators or business owners, if they're out there like trying to achieve some goal, you wake up with like a level of anxiety of like, oh, what do I have to do today? Like, this is a new day. I got to do this. This is this. But if you have something like a list, like for me, it's writing my training the night before. So I'm like, okay, I know, at 10 a.m. I'm going to the gym and this is what I have. And then when I get back, I have this video to edit or this to do. And having that list definitely clarifies things, because all of a sudden you can end up at the end of your day and you're even more anxious than you started because you've been running around like touching little projects and never actually getting, a big one moving forward.
Exactly.
Awesome. And then the last one is, you're like at the end of your life, you're looking back on everything you've done. What is the impact that you wanted to have made?
I want to change the way we approach college selection and student athletes, especially when it comes to American athletics. I think that if I can look back and I can see that I have made a substantive positive difference in the kids that I've worked with and the kids that our company's been able to help, then everything else is just gravy beyond that. It's a passion point for me. And I think we can make that better. It just takes a little bit of reframing.
Amazing. I think it's so important helping like the young generation, like the youth of these days, because of course there's a lot of us that end up, broken or things that we need to fix or not need to fix, but like we've had these traumatic experiences that we need to heal from and work through. That takes a lot longer than like just trying to prevent them in the first place, or giving people at least the tools to know how to deal with them when they come up, which is why I think, working with the high school level athletes or just high schoolers in general, high school age people is just so important, because it's such a transformative, few years of people's lives, especially then as they go on to college. I think it's some of the most transformative, because of course, like kind of that blueprint of who you are, it comes from childhood and all these things you've learned, but that's mostly the parents. And then when you get in that high school, you're kind of distanced from your parents, you're finding out who you are outside of that. And that's where like mentors like yourself and what your business does is so important for those athletes.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we're in a very lucky position to be able to share that knowledge with somebody. And hopefully if they can just miss one hiccup, then at least we've made a positive difference in some direction.
Yeah, 100%. Or at least, give them the knowledge of like, okay, if you do make this decision and hit that hiccup, like at least this is what to do, because sometimes people do have to learn on their own, as I've definitely learned the hard way.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I know we did an NAL bootcamp together, and you guys offer a lot of different consulting packages and things. So where can people learn more about that? Where can people find that stuff? Where can they follow along?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website's going to have a lot of our information, www.athletes2athletes.com. I think it's on my shirt here. Let's see here. Boom. If they can see that, there it is. So website, you can find all of our information. You can schedule intro calls with myself and the other advisors to discuss what we do in more detail, how we might be able to help you. You can find us on Instagram, Athletes to Athletes, Facebook, Athletes to Athletes, Twitter. I think we're A2A advising because we have too many characters. But yeah, that's TikTok. We're trying to get on TikTok. We're not cool, but we're trying to get on TikTok. We're working on it. We took some tips from you on the NIL boot camp. We're working on it. We're getting things going.
There we go. Yeah, TikTok's the place to be. I love TikTok.
I love watching it. I got to learn how to use it a little better.
Well, that's the key though. Like just keep watching, and like then that'll help you get inspiration for creating stuff. Like that's always my tip to everybody is like spend time watching. Like now I don't consume as much. I'll say like my boyfriend gets stuck in the TikTok loop. Like he's like, he never posts anything. He just watches. And he'll be like watching all night. And I'm like, I can't stand the sound of TikTok like at nighttime, just like, cause it's like 10 seconds of one sound or 5 seconds of one sound and skipping.
Oh yeah. Just rapid fire.
But like when you start out for sure, especially you want to create stuff like, yeah, it's like, okay, I need inspiration. Like what are other people doing? And there's college athletes on there are so creative. It's crazy.
Oh yeah. It's been really fun to like watch and try and learn. It's cool to see a new medium come into light.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, I'll definitely put the website in the show notes so people can go check that out. And thank you so much for spending the time and sharing your knowledge and your story on everything, college sports and college athletes. I hope this helps a lot of athletes going through the process, or parents who might have athletes going through the process, or anyone who just wants to gain some insight of, what it takes to actually be a college athlete. I think a lot of us up in Canada don't, fully grasp how the pressure that is put on athletes, even at the high school level. So.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for letting me come on and chat with you. This was an absolute blast, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.